have good news for you today. Who could use a little good news today? Well, you're in the right place. If you've got a Bible, turn in it to the book of Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5. And we have been now a few weeks in the series entitled Wings of Healing. And I don't know if you noticed that it hasn't really gone in order in any particular way. We've been all through the Old Testament and the New Testament. And honestly, I don't exactly know when it's going to end. All I know is when the Holy Spirit stops talking, I stop talking. And so, oh, you can say amen to that. But so I'm not there yet. There is one passage in the Bible that if you were to say, I want you to go out and tell people about the healing power of Jesus, this is the story that I would turn to. I said that about James chapter 5 last week. If there was one place in the Bible you gave me to preach about the power of prayer and what it means to come together as a community and to pray for one another, I'd go to James chapter 5. But if it was just somebody that didn't know Jesus yet, if it was just somebody that hadn't really been told that not only does Jesus come to save us spiritually, but he comes to minister to the whole person, body, soul, mind, and spirit, I'd go to this story of this woman that came up to him in Capernaum. Now, Capernaum is a little town. It's right on the banks of the Sea of Galilee, which is a freshwater lake. It's a fishing village, and it's still there. And so a lot of the places in Israel, if you go to visit a place that's mentioned, some of the cities, even major cities, aren't there anymore. And a lot of the places in those cities are gone. But Capernaum is this one little city way up in the northern Galilee that you can still visit. They've got a house there that they've uncovered, and then they've built a building over it. They call it Peter's house. They don't know if it's Peter's house, but they found a house, and they know Peter lived in Capernaum, and so they figured, well, that's as good as any. But there is something really cool, a synagogue. There's the foundations of a synagogue that's been reconstructed, and it's been built over several times. And so what's cool about that is many of the stories, especially during the first couple of years of Jesus' ministry, happened right there in that little town, and even some of them happened in that synagogue. Have you ever wanted to go visit those places? I just have an announcement today. I should wait until I have all the details, but I am setting as a goal to go to Israel next fall in September. And so I will have more details about it, but it's a chunk of change, so start saving up some money if you've ever always wanted to go. We're going to do our own group. The last 2 times I've been, I went with other people, and they take you to places and make you stay longer than you want to be, and then the places you want to go, they don't pay much attention. So we're just going to do our own, but it's going to be awesome. So people have been asking me for 20 years to take a trip to Israel, so this is it. Next September. Sound fun to anybody else? Okay, mark it down. I will, as soon as I get dates and prices and all that stuff hammered out here over the next short little time, I'll let you know more details. But anyway, whenever I go to Israel, one of my favorite places is Capernaum, because you can turn and see how beautiful it is. Your imagination can run wild about what it must have looked like when there were people living there. And one of my favorite stories about the healing touch of the Lord takes place right here in Capernaum. And so we're reading from the Gospel of Mark. The Gospels of Luke and Matthew also tell this story. I like Mark's version. It's actually the longest. Oftentimes, Matthew and Luke tell a longer version, but Mark is the longest, most detailed. We think it's probably the oldest version of this story about Jesus. And what's cool about it is he notices little details that really that make the story come alive. So there's almost not a wasted word in this entire story. But it begins like this. It says, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him. There's this cool word. If you've never been here before, I stop and kind of take notice of words. When I study it, I always study it in the original Greek language. But that word crowd is a significant one for Mark. It's aklos. It's not just a bunch of people, but it always has this idea of an annoying crowd. And so the aklos is always pressing down and kind of just causing a commotion. It's almost like whenever you see the word crowd in the gospel stories, it makes you feel like someplace Jesus wants to get away from. And so not that he doesn't love the people, but there's a difference between the people and the oikos. How many know what I'm talking about? Okay, if you don't know what I'm talking about, come with me to Walmart on Thanksgiving night, and I'll show you what an oikos looks like. It says, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Anybody relate to what she's talking about? This is such a descriptive story about a woman. Now, she's got something wrong with her that's physical, but do you hear it in this description? It's much more than just a physical problem, because it affects every area of your life. I'm convinced of that. It's throughout the series on healing, that when healing is complete, it brings restoration to body, soul, mind, and spirit, because all those are related. So listen to this. It says that she has suffered. That word is mastix. It means like a scourge on your back. Like she's just been tormented for 12 years. So picture this. If this was a bleeding issue, now we don't know, but suppose that it began with her in adolescence. The average lifespan in those days was about 40 years, and even less for women. And so it could be that this is describing something that she has dealt with for at least half of her life. She's known this. And it wasn't just once a month, or it wasn't just once in a while, but it was for 12 long years, every day. And so not only did she have the physical part of it, but then it says that she'd been to many doctors. I'm going to talk about that word doctors, because it's not like what we think of when we think of doctors. But she'd been to many doctors, and she had spent all she had. And so this had affected her physically, emotionally, socially, and even financially. It had ruined her. And she was completely out of resources. And still, it says, instead of getting better, she got worse. Are you with me on this story? And then it says, and when she heard about Jesus, because he had been traveling around the countryside and preaching the gospel and healing people, and when she heard about him, she came up behind him in the crowd and she touched his cloak. Let me ask you, why did she come up behind him? Anybody? What's that? Because she's unclean. Oh, you're skipping ahead to the end because you know about this story, right? But she's absolutely right. She's unclean. She feels unworthy. She's embarrassed. You don't come up behind somebody and try to sneak something from them if you feel worthy or if you have self-esteem. So this is somebody that's really does not feel worthy to come face to face with him and to speak with him. And then it says, and she touched his cloak. In Matthew and Luke, it adds a little word that says he touched the hem of his cloak, or it means fringe. So it could be, some people think it's the little tassels that they would wear on their Jewish clothing or their cloaks. So she came up to touch his tassel. So this is a woman that just thinks, she's heard about Jesus. It doesn't mean that she's fully taught and indoctrinated by Jesus, but she knows enough to think there's something special about this guy. And even though her faith isn't like a full-blown faith, even if it's just starting off as kind of a little bit of superstition, maybe if I could just grab a hold of his tassel, whatever it is, God honors that first little step of faith that she makes. And so she reaches out and she touches his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. And so there's 3 words in this passage that have to do with healed. There's 3 main words in the New Testament, and this story uses all 3 words. And the first word for healed is sozo. Say sozo. Sozo can be translated like this. It can be translated as saved. So anytime you see the word saved in the New Testament, like believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved, you know, you and I think of, well, saved, that means I'm going to go to heaven or whatever that means to me. But that word is more holistic. It means saved, it means healed, it means delivered and restored. So she could have even said it like this: if I just touch his clothes, I'll be delivered. I'll be rescued. And so she was looking for something that would change her whole life. And immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was cured from her suffering. That's another word for healing. And they really are just synonyms, but I think it's curious that he uses two different words, because yomai means to be cured. It means actually to be physically fixed. So I don't want you to hear me, as much as I'm talking about God healing us emotionally and spiritually and every other way, I don't want you to hear to say that he doesn't care about our physical bodies. But it doesn't end with that. Are you with me? Because by touching her physical body, everything else came back in line too. Then it goes on to say, and once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, he turned around in the crowd and he asked, who touched my clothes? This is an amazing part of the story for me. I have questions about this, and Mark just states it, and several times in the gospel it talks about power being with Jesus. King James translates it virtue. So it's like something that comes out of him. Do you remember in the very first part of this series, I mentioned in the Old Testament, God comes to the Israelites and he says, my name is Yahweh Ropheka. I am God, your healer. Not just the God that heals. It's not just something that I do. I am Yahweh Ropheka, your healer. So this is something that I am. And so if we have a relationship with God, we have a relationship with someone whose name is God, my healer. Are you with me? I give him praise for any time that I'm healed, whether it's miraculous or just in the ordinary way. Just the very fact that I'm alive today, I give him credit for that. Anybody else? Very first Sunday I preached on this, I asked people, how many have been healed in this place? About 5 people raised their hands. Let me ask you this, have you learned anything for the last 12 weeks? How many have been healed in this place? Oh, your hand should go up. Are you alive? If you're still on the right side of the grass, you've been healed trillions of times. Because there's trillions of things that should have taken you out. And if you lived even 100 years ago, that flu you caught last year would have killed you. And so how many times have you been healed over and over? God heals me every night. Last night, I had a little boo-boo on my pinky right there. And this morning, it's better. Are you excited for me? Tiny little, can you see it? You can almost see it. It's better. Why? Because Jesus is my healer. I said, I know, well, that's just your body that healed, but who made it like that? It's a part of who he is. How many are with me? And so if Jesus is God come in the flesh, if Jesus is not just his representative, but he is God incarnate, then whenever he goes, there stands to reason that that healing virtue or that character of healing goes with him. Are you with me? Because it's not what he does, it's who he is. So I don't know what this word means. It's dunamis in Greek. It means like dynamite or ability. But it says somehow, not only did Jesus feel something, even though she just touched his garment, so chances are physically he didn't feel that because it was an outer garment, but he could tell that some of that healing power had left him. I love that. I don't understand. It's kind of mysterious to me, and Mark leaves it like that. But this one thing I know is Jesus could feel it, and something else is that woman could feel it as well. She knew right away that she had been healed. And then something happens. Then there's an E.F. Hutton moment. You have to be pretty old to know those commercials. You remember where everything just kind of stops because Jesus turns around and he says, who touched my clothes? Now right then, what's your emotion? If you're this woman that did not feel qualified to come and look him in the eye, but snuck up behind him and grabbed the hem of his garment and then got miraculously healed when the master turns and says, who touched my clothes? What's your emotional response to that? You're in trouble. Aren't you scared? Mark is telling this story. That's not by accident, by the way. That's how he's telling this story. Is at this moment we're going, I wonder what he's going to do to her. I wonder if she's in trouble. What happened? Why does Jesus care? Is he mad at her? Is he going to scold her? Is he going to rebuke her? What's going to happen? And his disciples respond like this. He said, you see the people crowding around you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around for the one who had done it. 2 things about the Gospel of Mark that I love that's a little bit different than the other 3 Gospels is in the Gospel of Mark, the disciples are always dummies. They're always knuckleheads. They never get one question right in the Gospel of Mark. They always respond wrong. They always say the wrong thing, and they never understand what Jesus is doing. I love those versions of the disciples. I fit in a lot better with them than the other ones. Matthew gives them more credit. He says, only later did they realize. Mark just says, these guys were knuckleheads. They didn't get it. They're always saying, Jesus, you've got so many people around you. How you say, who touched me? Obviously, they're not understanding what's going on with the story. The other thing that's really cool about the Gospel of Mark is Mark always pays attention to people's eyes. So where other Gospels won't mention it, Mark has always mentioned what Jesus is doing with his eyes. And then not only does he ask the question, but he keeps looking around, not just casually, but darting around. He's looking around. Was it you, Eirik? Who touched me? Now here's a question I forgot to ask this first service. Before I go on to the next point of this story, you can talk about this on the way home. But why did Jesus ask that question? Is it that he really didn't know? Well, you can say, well, no, he knows everything. Well, or did he? Did he ask this question? So how much of his power and how much of his privilege of knowing everything did he leave behind in heaven to come? How much of that did he leave behind to become fully human and be dependent on the Holy Spirit? Oh man, it's a big theological question, but I think it's interesting. He asked this question, who touched me? Not because he was trying to ball them out, because he knew that the miracle wasn't complete yet. There was something more he wanted to do in this woman's life. And so then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, this is brilliant, say it with me, would you? Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be made whole from your suffering. That's the third word for healing, is to be made whole. Every time it's used in the New Testament, it has to do with a physical being healed. He says, you've been made whole. You've been set free from that whip that's on your back, that thing that's been tormenting you. Not just the physical one, but the shame and the grief and the pain and the self-doubt and all those things that have been keeping you isolated, that have been keeping you from having a relationship with God, that have been keeping you from having a healthy relationship with other people. Is you have been set free, you've been healed, you've been made whole, body, soul, mind, and spirit. How many are grateful for the healing power of the Lord in our life? And so I just say, there's so much in this story, I could preach it 100 times and find 100 different things. But I just want to talk about what it means to grab a hold of the hem of Jesus' garment and just say, Lord, I'm putting my faith in you today. I got something in my life. I've been tormented by it, and I know that whatever else I don't know in my life, I know that you're the answer. I know that what I need is going to come from you. And so one of the first things he begins with, before she could even come, is there had to begin a part of the healing touch in her spirit that set her free from those doubts, from those fears, from that shame, to give her the kind of faith, even as small as it was, and even as imperfect as it was, to reach out and to grab a hold of the hem of his garment. Friends, I'm here to tell you today that sometimes it's our own self-worth that keeps us from coming to God. And so when Jesus came into the world, one of the things the gospel tells us is he was completely happy to pass by all the important people and all of the quote-unquote deserving people and go right into somebody's life that didn't seem to fit the mold, somebody that was from the other side of the tracks, from somebody that had been down the wrong road. When you think about what this woman had been through, you can only imagine how much courage it took for her to rise up and to grab a hold of the hem of his garment. But Jesus, when he was caught eating with people like tax collectors and even like prostitutes in his day, and people confronted him about it, his response was always the same thing. Would you read it with me? He'd say things like this: it is not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And if you're a sinner in this place, which means that you've somehow fallen short of the glory of God, because I'll tell you, I qualify for that one as well. Jesus came into the world to set people free that were imperfect and a little bit messed up. Do you qualify for that? Sometimes we think that we need to get our act together before God's going to do something for us or he's going to help us. I've even had people with this logic that, I think I'd like to start going to church again, but I need to get some things right with my life first. I need to straighten this out, straighten that, and maybe if I fix myself up a little bit, maybe then I could be qualified to go back to church. Friends, it's like waiting until you're all better to go see the doctor. When you need to go to the doctor is when there's something wrong. Anybody with me? That's when the gospel really makes a difference. We need to go when something's wrong. You don't take your car to the mechanic when nothing's wrong with it. You take it when it's making that noise. You know what I'm talking about? And isn't it terrible when it stops making that noise right when you get there? But there is something about the gospel that's always reaching out to people that don't qualify. And so think about the thing that she had. Not only was it embarrassing, if it embarrasses you even to talk about a story like that, about such a personal thing, think about how embarrassing it must have been for her. It had been such a long time that she dealt with it. It was continual. It wasn't just one day she dealt with it. And it had ruined her finances. And friends, not only that, but it was aggravated, even made worse, by all of the false remedies that she had taught. Have you ever read any history stories about what they used to do back in those days to heal people? I read one. There's a commentator, a very old one, called Dr. Lightfoot, that was great at going through the Talmud and the Jewish teachings of the rabbis to find historically what they used to do. They actually had some remedies for a woman with a chronic bleeding problem. You want to hear what some of them are? It would start with things like this. First, take 2 onions and boil them, and then smash them up, and then put it in a glass of wine, and then give it to her to drink. And then when she drinks it, say, "Be healed." And you yell at her. And then it says, and if that doesn't work, like it didn't. And so then they would do stuff like take 2 vines that are still green and cut them up into small pieces and put them in a ditch, and then have her sit over the ditch. And then when she's done with that ditch, take her out of that ditch and put her in another ditch. And then when she gets out of the ditch, then yell at her, "Be healed." And then it says, and then if that doesn't work, and it goes on like this, then the next one is like, take some herbs and some spices and some of this and put it in a glass of wine and then give it to her. Eventually, I'm reading all these and I'm saying, sooner or later, they should just stop messing with their wine, and maybe that would be the better thing. But it just goes on and on and on about all these cures, and you just know none of that is going to help this poor person. And then I just thought, I wonder what was not on that list that they used to try. 12 years? Think about some of the horrible things they used to do to people that they thought might help. And you can only imagine what this poor woman had been through. Now, I was reading a story. I have an ancestor named Jesse DeForest. He was one of the early leaders of the Huguenots that came over to settle in New York. But he died before he got there, exploring a new colony in Brazil on the Opaic River in 1624. You can look him up on Wikipedia. And I actually have an old 1800s copies of his diary with maps on that river. And there's this interesting part of his story of how he died. He went to go explore to see if a colony, this is when they were trying to figure out where to go. And it was up on a mountain, and he said when he got up there and met with the villagers, there was too many mosquitoes there. So he came back, and about a week later, he got this really bad fever, and we think it was from the sun. Well, you know what my mind does? That wasn't any sunstroke. They didn't know about mosquitoes and malaria and that kind of stuff. And then he got better. It said, so we bled him a little bit, and he got better. Back in those days, they thought, if you got sick, just drain some of the bad blood out. That didn't help people at all. Now they're just, now they're even sicker than when they started. But they didn't know. This is the 1600s. Think about what they did back in the Bible times. 2 weeks later, he gets another really bad fever from heat stroke, right? And he dies. And they just figure it was the sun that killed him. It was malaria or something else that he got. But in the process of trying to deal with it, think about how many things you think people poke and prod at you now. In the ancient world, this woman must have been through everything. And she did it because she was suffering. Not only was it physical, but it was emotional, it was social. And so Jesus is always looking in the midst of trying to do something good in our life. He's always looking for people that are on the margins, that are on the outskirts, that are on the fringe. I like this one little word that it says in Matthew, that she reached out and touched the fringe of his garment, because it's the fringe people that he's always looking for. It's the people that nobody else wants to deal with, the people that other people have forgotten about. And so there's a place in Luke 17 that says this, and as Jesus was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." So why were they a far way off? Why didn't they come close to him? Because when they had leprosy, not only was it very contagious, but there was something even more than that. It was also considered a judgment of God on them. Back in the ancient world, they just assumed that if you're sick or something bad happened to you, it's because there's sin in your life or you've done something wrong. You know, that sounds like a very ancient thing to think, but I still run into people that blame themselves for stuff. There still is some part of our life that if we're going to answer all the why questions in our life, if everything happens for a reason, then that means if something bad happens to me, it's either God's fault or it's my fault. I've got to find someone to blame. How many are with me? And so not only does that injury come, but also comes the insult, comes the shame that's associated with it. And I love the fact that Jesus ministered to all of those things. Have you ever seen Ben-Hur? It's a movie from 1959. Actually, there were several versions of it. Do you remember the Charlton Heston version, where he was this guy? It's back in the sword and sandals days. They would make movies about Jesus without Jesus being in it. You know, he was just kind of off in a distance or just. So Ben-Hur at one point brings Jesus some water, and towards the end of the movie, sorry for the spoiler, but he comes back to reconnect with his mother and his sister and finds out that they've been banished to a colony outside of the city because they've got leprosy. So now we know from the Bible how they treated it, but I just thought it was interesting. This is 1959, and look at how they're treating the malady of leprosy back in this day. Before I show you this clip, I just got to have a little bit of warning. Charlton Heston, for some odd reason, runs up to this girl and yells his first line at her. So I know some of you have sensitive heart problems, and I just don't want you to be shocked, because I've edited this several times, and I still don't know why he yells this first line. But it's the rest of it that I want you to watch. So watch this.
Why did you tell me they were dead?
It was what they wanted. Judah, you must not betray this faith. Will you do this for them?
Not to see them.
They're coming. Judah, love them in the way they most need to be loved. Not to look at them. Judah, let it be as if you had never come here. Please, Judah!
Is Judah well? Is he happy?
Yes, he is well. Your mind can be at rest for him. He is well, Miriam.
God be with you.
gone. We can go back.
Go back to what?
Judah, they have one blessing left. To think you remember them as they were. And live your own life. Forget what is here.
Forget. It's as though they were alive in a grave.
But what can you do?
Undo what you've done. How could you have suffered them to come here? I must seek.
No, Judah, please, Judah! Think, Judah, think! It will tear them apart if they see you.
You love those old movies. I love it. Just he goes to visit and get him. Does anybody else think it's awesome that the leper cave has its own bouncer? Guy just shows up out of nowhere. That would be me if I was in that movie. I'd be the bouncer at the leper cave, only I think I'd give that guy a really high voice. Nobody gets into the leper cave unless they got a letter from the governor. I don't know, maybe not. But here is this, the climax of this movie, of the hero of the movie, the guy that's going to star in Planet of the Apes. And he is so revulsed by the fact that his mother and his sister have leprosy, because leprosy is just such an awful thing that he doesn't go and see her. Friends, you know, I've talked to a lot of people with chronic illnesses, people that get shut off from coming to church, or people that are dealing with issues in their life. And one of the things that's so hard to deal with, in addition to the physical pain, is the isolation that happens. And people don't know what to say, and so they don't say anything, and it's so hard to break past those things. But you know, it's bad enough to have leprosy without people treating you like you've got leprosy. To come around to people and just say, I'm here for you, I love you. And it's amazing to me that when those 10 guys came and they came and called out to Jesus from a long way away, is Jesus actually went and touched them. It's because he wanted to set them free, body, soul, mind, and spirit. I'm so grateful, too, for his healing touch. Even in my body, he heals the little things in my life, the big things in my life. And people ask from time to time, I've been praying for a healing. I've got a problem in my feet. I've got a problem with headaches. I've got a problem in my back. I don't understand why God hasn't healed me yet, as if God is the one deciding that he doesn't want to heal you yet. And so it builds it up into something almost like, I think there's some people that deserve it and some people don't. Friends, I'm here to tell you, one of the things that this story tells us, and if you listen to it carefully, you think, what is it that this woman did to deserve a miracle? And the answer is, if you hear it right, not a thing. She didn't do anything. If you could earn it, if you could deserve it, it wouldn't be by grace. She reached up with a very simple, imperfect faith and just grabbed the hem of his garment. So it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about deserving it. In fact, the gospel talks a lot about how it delights Jesus' heart to skip past the people that think that they deserve something out of life and go and minister to people that don't. He tells a story once of a Pharisee and a tax collector that come to church. Pharisee being a very religious person, and tax collectors in all his stories were the bad guys. There's a whole backstory to it, but everybody's supposed to boo when you hear tax collector. They were really kind of the scum of the earth back in those days. And he said, but this tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. So friends, if you qualify like this tax collector, to just say, Lord, it's not that I deserve it or that I'm better than anybody else, but I'm just a sinner in need of the grace of the Lord. Anybody qualify for that? And congratulations, that's who Jesus came to save. He came to minister and restore and to do a work in all of our life, whatever it is that we're struggling with. And friends, sometimes the best thing we can do is just reach out by faith and grab a hold of the hem of his garment and hang on. I don't know about you, but I need the power of the Lord in my life each and every day. Anybody else say amen to that? I need him. I pray and cry out for that kind of thing all the time, whether it's physically or emotionally. I have a relationship with Jesus like that since I was a kid, where I just talk to him about the things that are going on in my life, the good things and the bad things. And I am so grateful for his healing power in my life, for the fact that I have somebody to call on. I don't know what people do, honestly, that don't have a relationship with Jesus and go through something terrible or go through something painful. I don't know. It's just been so long since I didn't have somebody to call on. But I'm telling you today, if you don't have a relationship with the living God like that, you can have one. You can call on him anytime, day and night. Whatever is going on in your life, whatever you're struggling with, whatever is the source of your suffering, just like this woman had a lot of sources in her suffering. And God delights in bringing healing and restoration even to people that don't feel like they deserve it. And in Luke chapter 5, it says they had come from every village of Galilee and from Judea and Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was with Jesus to heal the sick. And I'm here to tell you, friends, that same power is here today. That same power exists in our life when we've got Jesus in our life. He is still the great physician. Anybody say amen? He's still the one that we call on. He is my healer each and every day, and I can call on him no matter what's going on in my life. And the last part of it is just this. Not only did he give her a physical healing, but then he restored her in every possible way. So he restored her emotionally, socially, because this disease in particular, it kept her isolated from the rest of the world. But he not only deals with the physical things, the emotional things, but he also removes that thing that sometimes we were the ones who put it on ourselves, the shame, the guilt of it. I still even have good Christian believing people that will come to me and they'll be going through something hard, something with their kid, or a tragedy, or somebody dies before their time. And it's amazing. I think it's so common. I think it's just kind of part of human nature to try to find answers for things. And they'll say, Pastor, what did I do wrong? Maybe I didn't pray enough. You know, I used to read my Bible a lot more. And maybe that's why bad things have happened and my heart just breaks. Because I said, you think that's the heart of the Lord? To just judge people because they didn't get everything perfect? That's why this story is so beautiful to me. Because he looks at this woman, doesn't say that she was some great spiritual giant. You know, all that qualified her for being a person who's an example of faith was how desperate she was. She just didn't have any other solutions, and so she reached out to the Lord. And the Lord looked at her, and he honored her faith. He said, your faith has made you whole. It wasn't just like that positive thinking kind of thing, but her faith caused her to come and to reach out to the Lord. He does something else. Did you hear it in the passage? He calls her something. He doesn't just say to her woman, or he doesn't say young lady. He says, daughter. I love that part. Sometimes it's just the little words. He does the same thing when the 4 guys lower their friend down through the roof to be healed. He looks at him and he says, son, your faith has made you whole. But he looks at this woman and he calls her daughter. You know what that is? That's restoring her to the family. That's saying, Lord, you didn't just sneak in here undeservedly and steal healing. He goes, this is something that I wanted to do in your life. So here is this story that he looks back and he says, who touched my clothes? You think she's going to be in trouble. But the only reason he was not going to let up until he found her is because he didn't want her to slip off through the crowd thinking that she'd stolen something. He knew that even as much as she needed a physical healing, if she got healed physically, but then went away and still carried that shame, she wasn't all the way healed yet. And he didn't want to do it halfway. And so he called her out. He waited. She even came and she was petrified, but he knew he was going to deliver her from that as well. And he just looked at her and he loved her. Daughter, your faith has made you whole. He says, go and be made whole from your suffering. I'm taking all of that off your back, all of that weight, all of that shame, all of that guilt. I put it all on my shoulders, and you don't have to bear it anymore. In Isaiah chapter 54, prophesies like this. Would you read it with me? He says, do not be afraid. You will not be put to shame. Do not fear disgrace. You will not be humiliated. You will forget the shame of your youth and remember no more the reproach of your widow. Sister Linda said it. Part of this was not just what other people thought, but actually in Jewish law, because of this issue that she had, she was ceremonially unclean, unfit to come into the presence of the Lord. And if anybody, especially if any man, touched her during that time, which had been 12 years, they would have been ceremonially unclean for the whole day. So what an amazing thing it was. Jesus comes and he looks at her and he's not afraid. He turns, and even though she touched him, he wasn't afraid of reaching back out to her and restoring her all the way. He healed her body, soul, mind, and spirit. Anybody with me so far? Whatever it is that you're carrying today, friends, this is what Jesus is about. This is what it means to have a relationship with the Lord. This is to be able to call on him, whatever we're struggling with, and say, Lord, today, I need your healing power in my life. Whatever that virtue is that you felt leave, and that woman felt, that set her free, that healed her, I'm signing up for that today. Anybody else? I need more of that in my life. I need you each and every day, because I need to be restored on a regular basis. Would you bow your head with me for a moment? Can I just minister for a second? Lord, all over this place, I know firsthand, and I just know because I know people, that there are a lot of wounds in this place. There's a lot of different kinds of suffering. Lord, for some of us, it is just nagging physical things, some more major than others, but even the little ones can turn us, the strongest of us, into cowards sometimes. Even just the smallest little nagging pains. And I just pray right now for your healing power once again, to deliver, to minister, to heal even on a microscopic level, that you just bring health to every cell in our body. And Lord, too, I know that there's a lot of suffering that comes from shame, from memories, from things in the past, from things that have just weighed down our heart. And I just pray, Lord God, that you would come and just minister today. May you bring healing. We're calling out to you today. We're reaching out to the hem of your garment today. And I just pray, Lord, for your healing power to flow. In Jesus' name, in Jesus' name.